Hello there, Emily here. I'm one of the one-on-one coaches here on Team Addo. If you've ever thought about selling your spa or are curious about what you think you could get if you did sell your spa, you're gonna want to listen to this episode. Daniela is interviewing Ben Hernandez from Skytale Group, and it's a great conversation. Let me do a quick read of Ben's bio, and then we can play that interview. Ben Hernandez is founder and managing director of Skytale Group, a firm specializing in strategic management consulting and M&A advisory in the healthcare space. Ben and the Skytale team help businesses grow, scale, and sell. Prior to Skytale, Ben worked with an international investment bank, a hedge fund, and CPA and advisory firm. Ben received his BBA in finance from the Mays Business School at Texas A&M and MBA from Cox School of Business at Southern Methodist University. So let's go ahead and play that interview.
All right, Ben, welcome to the Spa Marketing Made Easy podcast. I'm so excited to have you here to talk about such a huge topic of how to sell, when to sell, what does that look like? You know, we always want to build a business that is a sellable asset. And your company, Skytale, helps spas go through that entire process. So I wanted to just have you here to shine some light on that and help our listeners understand how they can be the most prepared should they decide to sell. And what do they need? Where do they need to be to work with a company like yours?
Hi, Daniela. Thank you for having me. Yeah, excited to get into it.
So tell me a little bit about, let's just start off with what you guys actually are doing in this process. Because I think selling, when someone starts a company, you start it because it's like your passion, something you care about. And I'll ask our growth factor clients okay, well, what's your exit strategy? Are you just going to dissolve this thing that you've built? Are you going to let it operate on its own? How does that work? And we really, for so many of us, you get into the seven figures, you have an incredible asset that is worth something that shouldn't just be dissolved, right?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, and I love the way that you phrase that question because, we have a management consulting side. And that's the first question we ask is start with the end in mind. Why are you doing what you're doing? What does your future look like? And, I don't know what you hear when you ask that question, but the variety of answers is astonishing. And, having that end goal for your business is so important. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to leave it to your kids? Are you going to sell it to an associate? Are you going to sell, which is where we come into institutional capital? And yeah, I think that's the first question, and everyone should absolutely have a plan in place.
So when you're working with a company and they're thinking about selling, is that something that's 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 20 years down the line? At what point is someone, because there's a lot of preparation, right? You've got to get your numbers right. And you guys are helping them with that as well.
We are, yes. It varies. For most of our clients who are immediately interested in selling, the ones that call us and say, hey, we hear that you guys have an investment banking division. We're interested in selling our business. We're getting phone calls from institutional capital asking me to sell. And, how can you help? Those kind of clients, what they've built is potentially what they're selling. So any successes, failures, sins are going to show up in that sell side process. But you're right. We also do have some who call us and say, hey, I want to sell in 2 to 5 years. And each of those approaches is very different because for those, if you call and say, I want to sell in 2 to 5 years, Daniela, then I think there's a plethora of things that we need to talk about. is there a number you have in mind? Why 2 to 5 years? Are you aware of certain things? What is your culture like? Do you have, systems and SOPs and,
Yes. Yes,
historical
we
and
do.
future growth plans? Exactly. And those are all awesome answers. But if someone's ready to sell today, then, our job is to go through their business today and go through the process, if you will.
So, what do you think are the things that make a business most valuable? For me, I'm always talking about recurring revenue. So having as systemized as possible so that your grandma could come in and run the business. What other types of things are you guys looking for in the valuation?
Yeah, I think grandma running your business is the most important thing. I think utopia of a beautiful business is, can you build a business that can outlive you, the founder owner? And if you can, then it implies that you have a lot of things in place. But, breaking it down further, yeah, a lot of the things you touched on, I think number one, we immediately get into financial and operational performance. So, do you have financial controls, and what does your history look like from a financial perspective? And then we want to project out 2 to 3 years. So we take the past couple of years performance and explain the why and ask any questions around anything that we see that might be off. And then we project out forward, because a lot of it has to do with, when you're considering selling, are you selling at the peak, or are you selling at the midpoint where you're still leaving, as we like to say, a little bit of meat on the bone? That's very attractive if there's still future growth beyond that investment. And then operational performance, do you have SOPs? Do all of your team members know exactly what success means in their position? Do they have KPIs? Whatever it may be, that's a secret sauce to your specific organization is super valuable. Provider diversification is a big one. If you, Daniela, are the only provider, for example, in your organization, there's a big risk, because if you get hit by a bus, then we need to replace you. Whereas we have some sellers that have 4 or 5 providers. So then you've not only diversified that provider risk, but you've also proven that you know how to bring in, train new providers, which is very valuable. Patient retention, I think, is a big one, simply because that implies a lot of things. It implies that your team knows how to hold patients, that from an operational perspective, you know how to keep in touch with them, and certainly from a patient care perspective, that there's something there. And then I touched on this a little bit, but proven history of growth. And for some of us, it's, multi-site. Do you know how to acquire a location or de novo a location? Or if you're a single location, do you know how to, build out a new room or what have you? So as long as there's some historical proof of growth, that's also extremely valuable for us.
So I've heard over the years that kind of the gold standard that we're looking for is a 20% net profit. Is that in alignment with what you guys are looking for, or do you have a different number that you're looking at?
Yeah, for us, I think a well-run business in the market, as we've seen it, is about 22%. So yes, you're exactly right. I think if you can get around there, that for us is a really nice starting point. If it's 20%, that's nice as well. Anything below that, it's okay. But the way we view it is, you're leaving margin, you're leaving dollars on the table for the buyer, right? Because presumably the buyer is going to be able to figure out where it is that you're not completely efficient. So yes, we're seeing 22% as, I think, a good average for a decent sized organizations. And they can get as high as 20s to low 30s. But those are more for multi-site, where you're really starting to leverage some of that operations piece, where, maybe you have one administrative team member servicing 2 or 3 locations. But yeah, 22% is what we like.
And is that after ad backs, or is that just like, here's my books?
Yes, that's after add back. So that's a great question. If you're running your personal jet or whatever through your business, we're going to add that back to your point to where what we're really looking for is what is normal business operations. The other piece, in addition to add backs, is it's also assuming that you've adjusted for owner pay. So if you
Mhm.
and I are running a medical aesthetics practice, you may pay yourself 100,000 a year. I may pay myself 2 million a year. That doesn't matter. What we do is we zero that out and we simply ask Daniela, what is it that you're doing and what's production look like? And then we adjust to if we were to replace you in the marketplace, what would we have to pay? And we would adjust that for owner pay as well.
Okay, interesting. Um, and then as a baseline, this is another thing that I've heard and want to just confirm with you guys, is the selling price, do we kind of look at that as net profit times 3? Is that the baseline that, and then there's obviously different negotiation things, or is that number more relevant for other businesses?
It varies. So net profit to us is EBITDA, which is it's the same thing: free cash flow, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. So we get to that net profit, as you mentioned, number. And then beyond that, the multiple that we assume on it really depends on how big that EBITDA is. So, typical businesses that we sell are between 1 to 8 million of EBITDA roughly. And the multiple ranges between those varies pretty significantly from 6 to 10, 11 times multiple. So it depends what that free cash flow looks like.
Okay. So if you have a client and you said their net profit is between 1 to 8 million, but their top line revenue, you're typically working with spas that are doing between 4 to 40 million. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. Yes, I
Okay.
should have mentioned that. That's our ideal client on the investment banking side right now, or at least the middle of that bell curve, correct?
Okay. And then when you're working with them, are you looking at their numbers, all of that kind of stuff, looking at their just kind of the overall health of the business and then saying, here's what we think we could get?
Exactly. Yes. So, that's our very first order of business is anyone can call us and we would ask for some information and provide them what's called a pitch book. And it's kind of implied in the name. You can call 10 of us and we would be pitching you and saying, Daniela, we're the right partner for your business and here's why. But really, what's valuable to you in that pitch book is we would have gone through the light financial diligence and let you know, okay, here's the EBITDA academic example. Here, your business is $1 million of EBITDA and it's growing nicely. It's in a good area, good state that's business friendly. We think that conservatively speaking, it's a 6.5 times multiple academic example. And that then means, Daniela, that your business is worth $6.5 million. But then you get into some of the other pieces of your business. If it's a nicely growing business, we would expect also, and we would talk you through this, what's called an earnout, to where beyond the $6.5 million, to really align ourselves, the buyer and the seller, you might see an earnout to where a buyer is letting you know, okay, if you continue to grow over the next 2, 3 years, according to your projections, then there's an additional bonus or earnout that's available to you. And the reason they do that is, they're giving you not giving you, they're paying you, I should say, for the business that you've built, $6.5 million. They want to be sure that you're incentivized to continue to grow. So it's a really nice way to align. And then, we get into a little bit of beyond that from a deal structure perspective. You don't get $6.5 million and go to Bora Bora. It's actually a valuation, but let's call it middle of the fairway would be 75% of that is cash, and 25% of that is rollover equity, which means that you're buying shares into me, the buyer, and that platform. And hopefully that materializes into something nice for you. But the reason they do that, same thing. It's that nice alignment to where they're wanting you to stick around typically 4 to 5 years post a sale. So we go through a lot of that just from an education perspective early on to be sure that, any potential sellers have thought through what a true deal looks like from a deal structure perspective with a buyer.
So at what point, if you have this 4 to 5 years that you're staying on, at what point should someone come to you? How long does it take typically to go through the process? Because it seems like if I'm like, hey, I want to work for 7 more years, I got to start selling now, right? I got to start getting that moving.
Yes, yeah, and that part's interesting because some people know that and some people don't, and it's a surprise to them. But yeah, I think ideally, if you really want to be out in 5 years, I would think you'd want to start the process 6 years before you're ready to go. It takes about 9 months to go through all this. And I think, the 3 big stages of selling a business, the first stage is we're data gathering. We're putting together a big book on Daniela's business, right? We're putting together a big book on that to where we're describing you, we're describing your company, we're describing historical and future growth in your market, and what it is that you value out of a deal structure and a partner to allow buyers to align themselves to you. And then the other thing is we're building out a big data room where it has basically every document about your business that you can imagine, from founding documents to payroll and the like. That's all internal. The second big part of it is actually promoting this to the buyers. We usually like to show it to 40 to 60 buyers to give you the best opportunity, not just at the valuation, but to allow you to meet potential partners and pick the right one that speaks to you. That to us and a lot of our sellers is oftentimes as or more important than the valuation itself. So that's the other piece where you're getting to meet some of the buyers are getting to meet you. And then the third big phase is if you do sign that LOI, that offer letter, it's about a 90-day to close process where they do additional financial, legal, compliance diligence, and then we close. So it's about a 9-month process, 7 to 9 months. So 6 years would be a good time. We do have some people though that want to keep working 10 or 15 years, and they've built a business that they want to take chips off the table, or they want to find a partner to grow even faster with. So there are a lot of different motivations for sellers, but certainly I would say, I would expect to be on 4 to 5 years unless you want to get beat up a little bit on the value of your business.
So what about, I know you guys have your ideal business that you're working with that's between that 4 to 40 million in top line. What about the spas that are less than 4 million? How do you, because there's a lot that are at that kind of 1 to 2 mark. How do they sell? How do they go to, figure all this stuff out?
Yeah, good question. We get a lot of those because early on we don't know what it looks like. So when we build out that pitch book, we have what we call the Nordstrom model, basically of if we don't have it, we at least try to be helpful and point you to someone who does. So I think there are a few options. One, they can work with someone like you, for example, to continue to build their business and get their revenues up if they're early on in their life cycle or what have you. So one would be, if you
Get
are
to 4
willing
million.
yeah, if you want to get to 4 million or whatever your goal is, let's work with people who know how to put that plan in place for you and let's execute. That's one option. Other option, though, is if people say, nope, I'm done. One of the things that we try to do, there are some buyers out there that will buy sub-million EBITDA businesses. they're like gold to us, frankly, because there aren't a lot of them. But there are some smaller investors that do have the thesis of, hey, look, I don't want to compete with, big private equity for, Atto aesthetics, right? So give me the smaller businesses that are sub 500 or whatever in EBITDA, and those are the ones that I'm going after. So in that case, we try to make introductions to them. We may not specifically work with those clients, but we'll at least try to be helpful to make introductions to see if it might be the right fit for them.
I've noticed in the spa world, what happens is as a business is growing, a lot of times they'll buy other smaller businesses within their town that maybe are just like even 100 or 200,000 a year, like, but they're buying their list, they're buying their patient base or client base because it's like, how much would it cost me in ad spend, energy, and effort to get these people on my list? And they're obviously not all going to be clients. But like, if you think about it from that way, how long would it take me if I knock this person out of the competition? I take their list, so I feel like there's a lot of that going on. Also, we actually had a client um, who bought two other locations and she was able to double her revenue like
Oh, wow.
pretty quickly. So that's another way too, is like to buy these smaller locations, absorb them into yours. And then she had three locations instead of just one, just like that, which doing that on your own can be a challenge. So I think that, I know we didn't give like a concrete answer of where do you go, what do you do if you're less than that revenue amount. But I think going to your competition and going to people in your area that, may be interested in continuing to grow is a great option. Would you suggest that they still use kind of some of those principles of pricing or, to figure out like what do I value my business at?
Yeah, I think if you're thinking of selling at that sub level, it's a different valuation. The multiples would be, well below 6 times, like I mentioned, for a
Yeah.
million and up. I think depending on what range you are between, let's say, 200 to 900,000 of profitability, you'd be looking at, what you mentioned earlier, Daniela. Maybe it's more of a 3 to 5 or 4 times multiple, depending on where you are in that range. Yes, so there is a way to value that. I would also add, which is why we would punt them to you, right? Is because you came up with the strategy of, hey, have you called people in your area? But I would also add, if you do have that strategy, that's also a different valuation. So the valuations that we view is if you're selling to private equity or institutional capital, a family office, something like that. If you're doing a business to business sale, that's a slightly different valuation for various reasons. If you think about it, we talked about, I'm giving you this nice multiple, but in exchange, I want you to roll over equity. I want you to stick around 4 or 5 years, so on and so forth. Usually when it's a private sale like that, business to business, oftentimes people leave within 6 months or whatever it is that you negotiate. There's not that rollover component to it. So what that means is there's more risk. If I'm buying your business as a private to private, there's more risk in that if you're leaving right away. So the value is a little bit lower there. So if you're going through the acquisition model, I would say, find someone who knows how to value that and buy it at the appropriate price, because you don't have the equity component. They're not sticking around. You don't have some of those clause in there to help de-risk the asset that you're buying.
So you think that it's a better, like if there's a spa, say we have like a $2 million spa, and part of their strategy to get to the 4 million or to get to the higher multiple was to acquire some of these other local businesses. Do you think that's not a great idea? Or do you think would it be better to kind of invest their funds into building their brand on their own rather than acquiring a company in terms of risk and whatnot?
No, I think it's a good idea. I think it has to be dependent on the business. And here's what I mean by that. So, putting my consulting hat on, we have clients that de novo their businesses, and we have clients that have an acquisition strategy. Both work absolutely marvelously. And then I think you just go through the checkbox of who are you as a business. If you're a de novo heavy business, then the advantages are I get to put my own EMR systems in there. Marketing's going to be seamless. The four walls are going to be painted the same way. I get to hire from the beginning, so it's a lot more seamless there. The negatives are it takes a little bit longer to cash flow, the build out costs, so on and so forth. So you look at that, and then you look at the acquisition strategy of if I acquire, the medical aesthetics practice 2 streets away, the advantages are I get immediate cash flow. There's a team there already. There's already a patient base, as you mentioned earlier, Daniela. The negatives or challenges, maybe not necessarily negatives, is I might have to adopt whatever EMR system there's in place. I might have to adopt the culture that's already in place. So you have these things that are already in place from that business. So as best you can, you want to align it to be sure that philosophically you see it the same way. But I would say that both are highly, highly successful. And it would just depend on what speaks to you as a business owner and making sure that you have the right playbook depending on which one of those you want to do. If you think about it, the buyers that are acquiring these businesses, they have the same philosophy. They're buying up practices in your area or region, and they're trying to do the best that they can to make it a single organization. So I think it is a good strategy, the one you put forth.
So what are the questions, you don't know what you don't know. What are the things that I'm not asking that are things that when people come to you, you're like, here's the thing that you should know.
Yeah, I think if you're thinking of selling your business, the big things to know, we talked about a lot of them, the rollover equity component, the 4 to 5 years that you're going to be an employee, which as a business owner, some of us will have to, really be okay with that and get comfortable with that. I think the other thing maybe that we haven't touched on is from a buyer perspective, really understand that you're not handing over the keys to your house and moving out. You're actually living together for a few years. So then what does that mean? I would do a lot of analysis on the buyers because there are some buyers that were doing HVACs a year ago and now we're in medical aesthetics because it's a very attractive industry. And, if you're looking at it from a high inflationary environment, but, recession, it's fairly recession resistant. So it's a place that investors are putting their money into. So who is that buyer? So if I had a magic wand, maybe questions to ask and figure out is, how long has this group been around? Is it 10 years? Is it 6 months? Do they have a healthcare focus? Have they actually built out platforms in other healthcare subsectors that have consolidated, such as ophthalmology, dental? The ones that they've done, do they have a retail component to it? And what have their returns been? Because if you're thinking about rolling over 25% of your equity, that means a fourth of your business value. You're entrusting that this buyer is going to actually grow it and do something nice with it. So I think that would maybe be the other thing, is to really do homework on the buyer who's your potential partner for the next few years, and feel that they're the right place for your business.
Great advice. Well, this was even eye-opening for me especially with the timeline thing, because I know a lot of the spa owners, going back to that exit strategy question, we're looking at, 10 to 15 years out. And so it's like, it's not just, okay, I'm going to sell the year before I retire. It's really something that just goes to show how important it is to really have the big picture vision of what it is that you're creating, what your goals and focuses are, how much money you want to make, how much you're willing to invest to grow this thing to get a bigger payout at the end. Because I do think there's so much money that's being left on the table from individuals who started a business out of passion out of wanting to help and support and, their clients and patients wanting to serve this industry and not necessarily thinking about it as this incredible asset that they're also building, that can be a tremendous payout for them if done properly.
Yes, and I think that's why, going back to the beginning of our conversation, the question that you ask people that you work with, why are you doing this? What is your end, is so important because of everything you just touched on. And you're also right. We get a lot of surprise questions when we do mention the 4 or 5 years, but also when we mention you built this out of passion to help people. And now it's this asset that's worth a lot of money. And I think that surprises people as well, because, before 2 years ago, consolidation wasn't that heavy in medical aesthetics. So there's still a lot of ramp up in learning. And I think the valuation is one of the nice surprises in this case that we hear from people.
Very good. Well, where can our listeners find you, connect with you? What are the places if they want to learn more?
Yes, so our website is skytalegroup.com, SKYTALE group.com. And then, can always reach out to me. My email is ben.hernandez@skytalegroup.com. And, we like to do things on social media and conferences and the like to be thought leaders. So any way we can help, we always love to.
Wonderful. Well, we'll get all of that linked up below the show. Thank you so much for your time. I learned so much. I know this is going to be incredibly valuable for our listeners. Make sure you check out Skytale and answer that question for yourself. What is your exit strategy? That's a big, important thing that can really change your life. So take the time and do that for yourself. We'll catch you on the next episode.